the Dallas game last year, he told us a story about how in 2017, right before roster cut down day, he kind of knocked on his window as he was driving out of the players' lot with his mom, and that was kind of when he first realized that he made it. I know he was on the practice squad in 16, but from where he was then to where he is now as a reliable every game starter for you guys, what do you think of just the growth he's had in his time here?
Yeah, it's been fun to see. I think his approach has always been the same, but I think his attention to the details in his job has picked up over the years. I think because he's got such a good head on his shoulders, and just a good support system off the field, he's been able to really, I think, focus on his on-the-field stuff. He got married last year. He's growing up, obviously. Getting older in the league, but it's fun to see him develop as a super reliable guy. I mean, he was always a guy you felt pretty good about plugging in there. You knew the effort was always going to be there. You knew the finish was going to be there. And he played all three positions for us in the interior line. Was really excited to see him get that contract. Now I think he's probably underpaid. I think we can all agree on that. Just the way that he's played so consistently for us, and his value to this offense as not only our backup center, but our starting guard. He's got a great disposition. He's one of the funniest guys on the squad. I think other than that conversation we had at the lunch table the one day when he's being a little bit down on himself, he's usually a pretty chipper, positive guy, and he brings a lot to our locker room and our huddle.
Aaron, how do you prepare for a team that's been a really great divisional opponent over the years, but also a team that's pretty desperate for a win?
Yeah, same way I think you always do. Obviously, there's been a few weeks between the time we played them. Don't always have this situation where you play a division opponent and get done with them after 8 weeks in the season. So, this is 2 games in the first 7. So there's not a ton of changes. Obviously, they went and got a defensive end and then subsequently traded him last week. There's some more young guys playing in the secondary. Obviously, Anthony's out with an injury. So there's been some changes for sure. But, every time you play a Mike Zimmer team, you got to be ready for everything. He's a phenomenal coach. I was telling a friend of mine, to see him mentioned being on the hot seat to me is absolutely crazy. I think he's one of the best coaches in the league and has been for a long time. It's just they don't all give you the trouble and the scheme that Mike does. I have a lot of respect for the way that he coaches and the way he especially coaches defense.
Hey, Aaron, earlier in your career, there were some instances when you could use 4 and 5 wide receivers, like when you had Driver, Jennings, Jones, and Jordy. You don't see that much in your offense where you use 4 wides. Usually there's almost always a tight end. Has that just something you think that's changed league-wide? Is it something that within this offense that makes the tight end position so important?
I think it's a lot of those things, Tom. I think a big part of it for us is just trying to get our best players on the field. And it's hard to justify keeping Mercedes off the field, especially with the versatility that he brings us as a blocker on line of scrimmage, as a guy who can block in the pass game, as a guy who can make plays in the pass game down the field. I think his versatility and obviously Robert's versatility make it imperative those guys get on the field. Injuries, obviously have shaken some things up as well. We've had obviously Tyler in the mix, always personnel-wise. When he's healthy and Alan Lazard being out has changed up some things. But those teams back then when we had J. Mike and Greg and Donald and James and Jordy and young Randall, we could go 4 and 5 wides, frequently, and we did. We did a lot when J. Mike was there. Obviously, didn't want to take him off the field, so we did a lot of 0-1 personnel with 4 wides and a tight end, and it was difficult for teams to try and match up. And then we moved, especially when Cobby was younger, we could do that and then run all of our run plays, with Randall, because he was so versatile. but you're just not seeing as much of that, and there's not those five guys here at the moment.
Just wondering, the first game against Minnesota, the Vikings had a couple rookie corners who making their NFL debuts, and they hadn't had a preseason as well, any preseason games. I'm just wondering, now that they've had a handful of games of experience, when you're looking at the Vikings on tape, do you notice any difference in those two guys, Gladney and Dantzler, or have you seen any difference in them now that they have a handful of games of experience?
Yeah, I mean, experience is the ultimate teacher, and it definitely shows on the tape. Those guys getting more opportunities, especially Gladney. Didn't play a ton in our first game. They're both really talented guys. They picked three guys in the draft. All three of them are playing extensive time for him now. So it does help having those two older safeties, especially Harrison. But Harris as well, being in the system for a few years now, definitely helps having those guys. They're playing a decent amount of too high, which means that they will have some help at times. That of course is dependent on them able to stop the run with their front and backers, and I think that's kind of where Mike there's a sweet spot for him, being able to play some two shell, have the safeties be involved in the run game, and also try and take away some of the down the field stuff you're doing with the passing game.
Yeah, Aaron, you talked over the years about the line of scrimmage sort of battle of checks you'd get into with Brian Urlacher with the Bears. I'm wondering if there's anybody with the Vikings, whether it be Hendricks, maybe Harrison, that you engage in that sort of mental battle with on the field, or is their style of defense just doesn't present that same type of confrontation?
Well, that defense back in those days with Brian had full reign to check in and out of stuff all the time. Dummy check, check from one high to too high to one high, pressure out of a pressure, no pressure into a pressure. So there was a lot of back and forth that you had to be in on and try and guess what he was checking to, especially with some of his colorful checks. This defense is a little different. I think they do a great job disguising. Harrison's always been one of the best disguising safeties in the league. Anthony does a great job with it. When they have all their veterans playing over the years, it's been really, really difficult. But I see them doing some more of that the last few weeks and really trying to disguise things. That's the sweet spot, especially on third down, that Mike has made a living for so many years. It's getting those guys to disguise their coverages and do all the different looks they can with double mug pressure and double edge possibility. But 22 is always a guy you have to figure out where he's at, because has been for a lot of years a really, really good blitzer, as well as a good cover guy.
Aaron, yesterday during your show with McAfee, you mentioned the touchdown to Devontae, the throw being you said he was 6 yards open and you threw it about 4 yards short of him, giving him 2 more yards. There seemed to be a number of instances in that game where you maybe missed on chances to give guys run after the catch opportunities. The big one, obviously, to Robert up the left sideline. Is there anything you saw in regards to maybe your technique or anything that was off in that game that maybe you need to look at and or guard against?
No, I don't think so. A couple of those to Tay, you just don't want to miss them. Obviously, the deep cross from right to left, that slowed him down probably a half step. The one, touchdown, he's so wide open. I'm glad he's that athletic, because that could have taken a touchdown off the board. The one to Robert, I think he was still widening as he passed his defender on kind of the pump and go, and I threw it as if he would kind of straighten up. So I felt really good about the throw on that one. Obviously, based on the way he ran it, it ended up having to be a little bit of a difficult catch. But no, I don't see a whole lot of things that were way off in that game.
Hi, Aaron. Just wondering if you might be willing to hop into the DeLorean with me. Back to 2008, your first career start. It's a Monday night. It's against Minnesota at Lambeau. What was that day like for you? And was there a time, either leading up to the game or during the game, where you really ultimately felt settled?
Well, I don't feel like I felt settled until I hit Greg on that deep corner post. Couple weeks ago, we've had, you're just talking about the Lions. Lions have always been kind of the most contentious rival, I feel like. But the Vikings have often been the biggest trash talkers back and forth. Especially back in, it's not that much anymore. It really isn't. Back in those times, in the late, first decade of the 2000s, it was a lot of fun, and they were great. On the back end, they had Winfield, who was so talented, and Cedric Griffin on the other side for so many years. It was a tough defense, but it wasn't really till that throw to Greg that I think probably really settled in. I felt good all day. I felt good in training camp. Obviously, it was an up and down training camp in 2008 with everything that was going on outside of the of the field, I guess. But Greg made that amazing catch, and then I hit that silly footed throw to Corey, and he made a great catch on that one, and felt pretty good about the way I played that night. Wasn't a super clean game by any means, but I took care of the football and made some plays.
Aaron, do you mind if I ask you two unrelated questions if I'm more concise than I normally am?
Yeah, I feel like that's a rhetorical question, so it's maybe three questions.
I know you enjoy those. All right. First, you talked about Zimmer. You talked about this scheme. You know what Davante did against them last week, against them in the first game. You know what he did last week. So knowing that they're going to want to take him away, how do you go about combating that and getting the ball to your best player? And then after the game, you talked a lot about the fans that were in Houston and how much it meant, and you don't take that for granted. I know you haven't taken things for granted throughout your career, but you've been saying a lot of that stuff more often. And I'm just wondering if now 6 games in with the way you're playing and you guys being 5-1, if you are taking more stock or appreciating more or, kind of soaking it in even more than you have before the success you're having.
Yeah, the first question, I think much like we had to do for years with Jordy, you got to move them around. You can't just have them stuck on one side or one spot. It makes it a little bit easier to double and to give help to. Davante is such a versatile guy. We can put him on either side, any position in the slot like we have been doing, like we did last week. I think that's what makes it most difficult is to be able to keep up with the various formations that we have. He had a big one in week 1 that was not, the focus. It wasn't like we came in on that Wednesday or Monday or Tuesday and said, we're going to throw Davante 15 targets, just like it wasn't on Sunday either. It was more just a product of, on third downs with a lot of man coverage, he had the opportunities. He had some one-on-ones and he made some great plays. When it comes to the second question, I think that's just kind of been my focus in general. The last few months of my life is just to enjoy things, to have an even more, joyful attitude of gratitude for the position I'm in, the opportunities I've been given, the opportunity in front of me with my teammates, still able to be the quarterback of the Green Bay Packers. It is strange not having fans at Lambeau. That is, I understand why, but it's just such a special experience. So to have fans the last couple of weeks, especially to win in Houston and get that ovation, that brings up so many memories. It was flashing through my mind walking off of Lambeau and how special those moments are as the fans will wait for, kind of hold the ovation as I'm doing some sort of post-game interview on the field and one of the last people off the field. There's no feeling like that. There really isn't. There's to walk off that field with those fans cheering. Obviously, it's more at home, but I'm not taking those for granted because you never know when that time is going to be up. And I've talked about it enough. I don't need to keep going into it, but I am very thankful for moments like that, and I don't take them for granted. And I hope there's many more.
Aaron, you've said before how Robert Tonyan showed his talent, and there's never a question of talent even early on. I'm curious because he was awfully raw when he got here. What did you see in a guy like that showed that he did have the talent to maybe progress into where he's become? And I know it's only been 2 games since Atlanta, but have you seen defenses maybe adjust a little bit to him since then?
Yeah, Ryan, I think there's just a few things that I've talked about over the weeks, here or on Pat's show that you just can't teach, that are kind of innate. Feel is often one of them, but catching the ball with your hands is the other one. And it just changes the way you throw to certain guys. You just have a different type of confidence. And from the first day, Bobby Tunyon, which I guess is how you're supposed to say it now, he always caught the ball with his hands. And I just think that there's something that kind of separates you. And you would think, everybody does that, but not everybody trusts their hands in the same way. As the great Jeff Janis would say, results. And he did have results catching the ball with his body. But it does kind of change the catch radius and the margin for error when a guy catches it with his hands all the time. And that's the first thing that jumped out of you at practice. And I was throwing to him, a lot on the look team during those first few weeks. But the thing that changed, I think, is his body. I think he, is really good friends with his buddy Kittle out in San Fran. And Kittle's rocked up dude, really good blocker. I think being around that just naturally made him kind of realize what changes he needed to make with his body and with his attention to detail on certain parts and areas that he was struggling in. I mean, he played, quarterback and receiver growing up, and he's playing tight end in the National Football League. So I'm really proud of the changes that he's made. His approach is great, though. His approach, his confidence, and then his ability to be critical of himself and to work on the things that he's struggled with has been his greatest attribute, I think. And yeah, when you catch so many touchdowns, teams are going to adjust the way you play them. But I think it's more a product of, the coverages on some of the other guys that's dictated where the ball has gone in the last couple of weeks.
Hey, Aaron, with the trade deadline coming up on Tuesday, do you bother to listen to the rumor mill at all, or have you been around so long now that you're just kind of used to getting let down by X, Y, and Z being rumored and X, Y, and Z not happening?
Well, I have the biggest gossip columnist with me at all times when I'm at the facility. His name is Tom Fanning. So Tom keeps me abreast of many of the rumors that are going on. Thank you, Tom. He's very proud of that designation I just gave him. But yeah, I mean, obviously, how do you not hear it? Guys are talking about it. We got the network on, and we got that other channel on all the time in the cafeteria. So you're looking at it, you're hearing it. Guys are talking about it, but we'll see it when we see it, and I'll hear it when I hear it from Tom.
You had mentioned on the throw to Quez in the Atlanta game that the wind affected the ball placement. So I'm curious, do you have time to factor in the wind at Lambeau when you're throwing anything, or can you play a deep shot like you would on a golf course to a degree, or is that just you got to throw it where you think it needs to go, and whatever happens after that is happens?
Well, I think a little bit of both. I think you have to have an awareness of what the wind is doing. And you can't quite always rely on the flags in the stadium. They're kind of all over the place. You learn which ones to look at, and often it's opposite of, the north end zone flag that I've learned. But, I think you have to be aware of that when you're throwing certain types of passes. The lower passes, they're able to cut through the wind better. Not as much on it. Maybe affects the aiming points if you're throwing a ball to the sidelines or a ball to the inside. It's the deeper throws that maybe are more affected. The easiest wind would be one that's kind of blowing directionally north to south, either way. The ones that are kind of across the field make it a little more difficult. At Lambeau, before they did the adjustment to the stadium and built the south end zone higher and some of the boxes higher on each side, it used to be really, really difficult. I remember a throw in 2008. We were playing Detroit in the last game of the year, and there were a few throws that I thought were way off. that were completed, and a few throws I thought were just absolute money. They weren't even close. And luckily, since they built those the stadium up, on those sides, especially in the south end zone, the wind is not as big of a factor. Like I'm talking about a 10 to 20 maybe doesn't hit the same way it used to, but it's still something you have to think about.
Hey, Aaron, you've had almost a different collection of skill players every week so far this season. Without getting specific on, play designs or whatever, can you just talk about the collaborative planning effort you got to go through to emphasize what you do have on Sunday versus what you don't?
Yeah, Mark, that's a great question. I think that's the beauty in what Matt's done. I've talked maybe not directly about this, but what he's done with personnel, the personnel groupings has been the beauty in the offense. And it's been, I think, the biggest learning for those guys each week is trying to put together packages of personnel that can fit the guys who are going to play. And not knowing, like on a Monday and Tuesday, when much of the plan gets put together is probably the hardest part for him, and a good question for him, I think, as well. But I think he's done a great job of trying to find ways to get our guys on the field and then get guys in positions where they can do some of the things they're asked to do. Like I look at Atlanta, I think that the mastery in that was, what we did with Jamal, moving him around and getting him on the field with, Tyler not playing, and then what we did with some of the tight end groupings as well. That's always the struggle, I think, but the fun part, and again, this is the challenge with the learning, but the fun part is seeing those come together on Monday and Tuesday, and then looking at them during the week and starting to see what kind of matchups you're going to be in your favor as you get to Sunday. And I think that's Matt and his staff and Nathaniel and those guys. That's one of the greatest things they've done this season is find ways to be creative with those personnel groupings and formations.
Hey, the other day, you were one of the first ones to run down there and congratulate them and celebrate. I don't want to project anything on you, but you seem to be really enjoying that when young guys get their first one. What's it like for a veteran like yourself to see that?
Yeah, Rob, I think you're projecting an emotion onto me again, which I don't appreciate. But to answer your question, I love seeing those moments. I really do. And the look on his face was special. At halftime, when the coaches were kind of figuring out the plays they want to put together for the second half, I was kind of walking around our side of the locker room, and I just looked over and saw Malik in his locker room. And you guys have seen the pick 16 when we won 6 in a row, and it's in the locker. It's one of my favorite pictures that I've seen, just because I think it totally encapsulates the emotion of that moment. There's just such a contentment about it and a joy that you can just kind of see on my face. That's what I felt. What I felt looking at Malik